Up next, a woman goes missing.
An obvious possibility was an abduction.
Police find hints of a secret life inside the victim's computer.
The internet opens up a whole new superhighway of suspects.
And disturbing evidence in an unexpected location.
Something had happened in that basement.
They almost look like chainsaw marks.
Scientists provide answers that no one wanted to accept.
When they introduce you to the chaplain, you know the news you're going to receive is not good.
It was a February morning in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. A routine workday for JDS Industries, a company that makes trophies for sports teams. Routine, except one of their most dependable employees, Darlene Vandergiesen, didn't report to work for a second straight day.
On Friday, when she did not show up for work, her boss called her parents, Dee and Jean.
Darlene's parents immediately drove to Darlene's apartment since they had their own key.
We went to her apartment and we saw our cell phone. We knew something was wrong because she never traveled anywhere, never did anything without having that cell phone so people could get a hold of her if they needed to.
Darlene's cell phone was especially important to her since she was deaf.
Deaf people rely heavily on cell phones and text messaging, instant messaging. That's their lifeline with the hearing world.
Darlene's cell phone records indicated she hadn't used her phone for the past 2 days. Police found nothing inside the apartment to indicate foul play.
There was no sign of a forced entry. There was no sign of a struggle. There was no overturned furniture or no broken items in her apartment.
Later that day, a restaurant employee called police reporting an abandoned truck in their parking lot. The truck was Darlene's.
The police were hoping that would be a clue as to who was with Darlene on that night, but no one in the Pizza Hut store remembered seeing Darlene.
Darlene's parents told police they were concerned she had been using the internet to meet men.
My reaction to her was, I said, "Oh, Darlene, be so careful. There are so many, excuse the expression, weirdos out there."
Investigators took Darlene's computer to the forensic lab, where they used a piece of software called EnCase.
Using EnCase, we can run a different type of search. We can either run an internet search or an instant messaging search, email search. We can look at internet history to see what pages were visited and when.
The search revealed several troubling emails Darlene had received 10 days before her disappearance.
The emails were threatening, but it was kind of in a childish way, kind of very poor English.
They were from a woman identified online as Wendy Smith.
Hello, darling. You are a troublemaker. You are ugly and stupid, bitch. I hate you.
According to Darlene's friends, she didn't know anyone by the name of Wendy Smith.
We kind of assume that they're possibly written by a deaf person. My understanding is that deaf people don't necessarily speak conversational English like hearing people do. They speak more in blocky, unstructured sentences just to get subject across.
Having a deaf acquaintance wouldn't have been unusual since Darlene, too, was hearing impaired.
We then sent a subpoena to Yahoo asking for any and all information regarding that account that was created.
The computer analysis also revealed Darlene met a local man online, Jeff Flynn, and the two had been dating. Flynn worked as a field hand on a farm about a 90-minute drive away. But when police got to his apartment, he too was missing.
The most recently anyone had seen him was Thursday, but no one knew where he had went. His friends down there were saying that that was unusual for him to leave town for any extended period of time.
Unusual, indeed. In the days following Darlene Vander Giesen's disappearance, her casual boyfriend, Jeff Flynn, was nowhere to be found.
When they suspected that Darlene might have just taken off for a weekend with this gentleman, I insisted over and over, this is not Darlene. Just didn't ring true with her personality.
4 days later, Jeff returned. He said he was visiting friends out of town.
He was nervous. Most people are nervous when they speak to the police. He was nervous and concerned for Darlene.
Inside the trunk of Jeff's car, evidence technicians found what looked like dried blood.
Law enforcement's antenna really went up when they saw the blood in the trunk.
My presumptive testing showed that it was likely blood, and further testing confirmed that it was. But the detectives were interested if it was, in fact, human.
When the police had told us they found blood in the car, how do you describe your heart sinking? Very, very low.
But forensic testing quickly proved the blood was not Darlene's. It was deer blood.
When they found out that the blood was deer blood, huge relief, a huge relief, because then the hope came back that possibly she was still alive somewhere.
Meanwhile, investigators were able to trace the source of the threatening emails Darlene received shortly before her disappearance.
When we did receive the emails that Darlene had received from Wendy Smith, that gave us the ability to send a subpoena to Yahoo to find out who may have created that Yahoo account.
The emails came from this home in downtown Sioux Falls. The occupant was a deaf woman named Daphne Wright.
Daphne said that she had met Darlene several times at the deaf apartments, that she had met her at the deaf club.
42-year-old Daphne Wright had no criminal record. During police questioning, Wright denied any involvement.
I don't send many emails. It could have been a hacker that did.
Okay. I don't believe the hacker story. I think you sent the emails to her. You created an account with a different name and sent her the emails on those days, telling her to stay away from the deaf apartments.
Oh, yeah, I did that.
Okay, and you created the name Wendy Smith?
Yes, I did that.
A background check revealed Daphne Wright had been involved in a public altercation with Darlene Vander Giesen just 5 days before she disappeared. Darlene was having dinner with Sally Ford, who was Daphne Wright's former lover.
They had a kind of an argument that the police had to be called to, and she had to be escorted off the property.
Daphne Wright told the police that she was jealous. She told the police that she thought that Darlene was destroying her relationship with her lover.
But by all accounts, Darlene and Sally Ford were nothing more than casual friends.
Darlene and this woman did not have a lesbian relationship, and in fact, Darlene was not a lesbian.
Darlene told friends she had patched things up with Daphne Wright after this incident.
She said, "Oh, Mom," she says, "we're friends now. We're all made up, and we're comfortable with each other. It's all okay now."
But when Daphne Wright was questioned about Darlene's disappearance, the jealousy was still apparent.
We've had a lot of problems, Sally and I.
Did you think Sally was cheating on you with Darlene?
Yes, I thought so, and sometimes she lies.
Who lies?
Sally.
Was Darlene the victim of a love triangle gone wrong? Daphne Wright's whereabouts on the night Darlene disappeared could provide the answer. After sending threatening emails to Darlene Vandergiesen, Daphne Wright became the prime suspect in her disappearance. Police got a search warrant for Daphne's house, and what they found inside was troubling.
I remember the smell of paint and the smell of cleaning products, especially when we got down towards the basement.
They look in the kitchen garbage, and there's a half-full bottle of chainsaw oil, and they look a little further, and there's a receipt for Ace Hardware for a chainsaw purchase just a few days ago.
This was a time of year in South Dakota where chainsaws are not in huge demand.
But there was no chainsaw in Daphne's house or anywhere on her property. Downstairs, the basement had been painted with blue paint.
There would be a spot painted here and then a spot painted there. And there'd be different sizes and things like that.
Parts of the wall, not the whole wall. A 3 or 4 foot section of the floor, but not the whole floor. Parts of the steps, but not all the steps.
A few feet away was a small room that had once been used to store coal.
The floor was completely repainted in this blue paint that was still tacky and soft to the touch, indicating that it had been freshly painted.
Police also noticed 7 distinct symmetrical cuts in the concrete floor.
Several of us made a comment that they almost looked like chainsaw marks.
So law enforcement began their investigation by going to the Ace Hardware stores in town.
Once there, investigators showed store clerks a photo lineup which included Daphne's picture.
One of the clerks was able to say, yes, I sold the chainsaw to a woman, and she was deaf. That matches a description of Daphne Wright to a T.
She came in with a note that said tree cutting machine. And he took her to the wrong section at first because he misunderstood, but then he took her to the chainsaw section. She was very worried about the price, and she picked out the cheapest chainsaw available at the store.
One scientist got into Daphne Wright's basement. They had no difficulty finding even more incriminating evidence on the wooden walls of the coal storage room.
We were able to see on the walls there were some very small, tiny pieces of bone and what appeared to be tissue.
Investigators collected the tissue and bone samples for analysis and compared those samples to the DNA they obtained from Darlene's tooth and hairbrushes.
That day, we were met by a couple of detectives and we were escorted upstairs, and when we opened the room, when they introduced you to the chaplain and the chief of police and all the detectives are in the room and ask you to sit down, you know the news you're going to receive is not good. And it wasn't.
Darlene's DNA matched the blood and tissue found in Daphne's basement.
She felt that Darlene was coming in between her and Sally, and the only way that she could take care of it was to eliminate her from the picture.
But investigators still had a problem. They didn't have Darlene's body.
A jury likes a body, a jury likes a murder weapon, and you just never know. You get that one skeptical juror who doesn't see the body, and there's maybe enough doubt for someone to say not guilty in a case like that.
In their search, police first checked the dumpsters where Daphne and her neighbors disposed of their trash.
By the time the officers got there, the dumpsters had already been dumped into the garbage truck and taken out to the city landfill.
Police went to the Sioux Falls landfill, a 470-acre property that serviced 5 counties and almost 250,000 people.
It was estimated that there was probably some 200 to 300 tons of garbage that had been brought out there in the days that we had been looking for Darlene.
It's below zero with the frigid wind chill, and all the police were volunteering out there searching. They had pitchforks and picks, and they were picking through the trash, 1 foot at a time.
For the 36 searchers, the job was difficult and frustrating. It went on for days, with no guarantee the body was even in the landfill.
The conditions couldn't have been more horrid. It was freezing, it was windy, it was awful.
And it was a massive effort to go through the contents of the landfill looking for Darlene.
She wanted to bring that little morsel of joy into your life. And every time I saw a photo, I saw a smile, and a big smile.
3 weeks after Darlene Vandergiesen went missing, her friends, family, and the deaf community gathered for a memorial service, even though investigators hadn't yet found her body.
We knew we were going to have a challenge ahead of us to locate her body.
After 5 days of searching at the landfill, investigators got a break. They found the legs and lower torso of an adult female. They also found bloody pieces of carpet and a blood-stained sweatshirt.
It was a sweatshirt that had some graphics on it of sign language. So we knew right there was a tie to the deaf community.
Testing proved it was Darlene's blood on the sweatshirt. But someone else's DNA was found inside the sweatshirt.
I took cuttings from the inside of the sweatshirt, hoping that one of them had transferred enough DNA or enough skin cells to the inside to get a full profile. And I was fortunate and did get a profile, and that matched Daphne Wright.
By being able to put Daphne Wright inside a sweatshirt that had Darlene Vandergiesen's blood and tissue on the front of it was extremely important.
The sweatshirt was a critical item in this case because it was one of the few pieces that tied both victim and suspect together.
25 miles away, across the border in Minnesota, a highway worker found Darlene's torso and her severed head encased in plastic. The medical examiner found Darlene suffered blunt force trauma to her head.
It had been tied, cinched around her throat with a piece of cord that was matched by one of our forensic people in Pierre to a spool of cord hanging on the garage wall in the house that was occupied by Daphne Wright.
The medical examiner had 2 theories as to how Darlene was murdered.
Cause of death was either this blunt force trauma, the 7-inch skull fracture, or suffocation from this bag being placed over her head, or a combination of the two.
Prosecutors say Daphne was convinced Darlene was trying to steal her ex-girlfriend and wanted to prevent it. She asked Darlene to meet her at the pizza restaurant. But once there, she changed her mind and asked Darlene to come to her house instead. Once there, Daphne hit Darlene with a heavy object, pushed her down the stairs, then tied a thick plastic bag around her head with cord from her home. She later bought a chainsaw to dismember Darlene's body. She left behind the sales receipt, store witnesses, and plenty of forensic evidence. Daphne disposed of the body parts in nearby dumpsters and in a ditch 25 miles away. Later, she tried to hide the evidence with paint, but it wasn't nearly enough.
There was this virtual mountain of evidence of the defendant's guilt.
Those emails and what the emails showed us pointed us right to Daphne Wright.
Daphne's motivation was one that has been throughout the ages in a homicide, is jealousy.
The tragedy is that Darlene had no romantic interest in Daphne's ex-girlfriend, Sally Ford.
Darlene was not interested in that. Darlene was not a lesbian person. Darlene and Sally did not have that kind of relationship.
Daphne Wright was charged with first-degree murder and became the first woman in South Dakota history to face a possible death sentence.
You want a mother to describe her daughter's murderer? A very cold-hearted. I don't know how to describe her. There's just no sense to it. And so the question why will more than likely never be answered unless Daphne herself will say why.
I would have to describe Daphne Wright as just a cold-blooded murderer. To be able to dismember a human body with a chainsaw takes a lot of gall, takes a lot of spite. In my opinion, you really have to dislike somebody to do that to them.
Daphne Wright was convicted, but the jury spared her life. Instead, she'll spend the rest of her life in prison with no possibility of parole.
There was maybe one or two jurors that stood their ground very firmly from the beginning that no matter what, they would not go with the death penalty.
One thing that just kept coming back was, what do we get out of sentencing her to the death penalty? What does she get out of it? What does society get out of it? What do we get out of it? And really, we didn't see anything good that came from it.
Well, this is a completely senseless murder. It didn't have to happen. Darlene was never a threat to the relationship between Sally and Daphne.
It taught me a lesson not to assume anything when you're talking to somebody, that the person that you're sitting across from in the interview room is probably capable of doing pretty much anything, even though the evidence might not show it up front.
This was about as textbook of a forensic case as you could think of. There was no smoking gun in this case. It was all the little bits of forensic evidence that connected the dots. And it all led detectives in one direction, and that was toward Daphne Wright.